The approach to her firing position required 4 hours of movement through terrain that challenged every skill she developed during years of specialized training. Moving alone through hostile territory, Ghost felt the familiar transformation from civilian photographer to precision sniper, her mind shifting into the heightened awareness state that had kept her alive through countless dangerous missions. Every step required careful evaluation. Loose rocks that might betray her position, patches of exposed earth that would show boot prints to enemy patrols, vegetation that provided concealment but might rustle if disturbed by careless movement. She moved like a predator, utilizing natural features of the terrain to remain invisible while steadily approaching her objective. The landscape was stunning in its harsh beauty. Geological formations carved by millions of years of erosion, peaks that disappeared into clouds, valleys so deep their bottoms remained shrouded in perpetual shadow. It was country that had witnessed the passage of armies since Alexander the Great, terrain that had been testing human endurance and determination for thousands of years. Her equipment felt perfectly balanced, each component positioned for maximum efficiency during the critical moments when she transitioned from movement to engagement. The rifle case moved naturally with her body. The optic system remained protected but accessible. The communication device stayed secured, but ready for immediate use if circumstances required contact with extraction support. 2 hours into her approach, she encountered the first sign of enemy activity: tire tracks in mud beside a seasonal stream, probably made by a patrol vehicle within the past 24 hours. She studied the impressions carefully, determining vehicle type and travel direction, ensuring her route wouldn't intersect with probable patrol patterns. The tracks suggested regular security sweeps rather than active search operations, which was encouraging. Enemy forces were conducting routine security rather than responding to specific intelligence about her mission. But it also confirmed that the operational area was actively patrolled, requiring extreme caution during her final approach to the firing position. She adjusted her route slightly, using terrain features to avoid areas where vehicle patrols might operate while maintaining her timeline for reaching the firing position. The margin for error was narrow. Arriving too early would mean extended exposure to discovery. Arriving too late would compromise her ability to conduct proper reconnaissance before the mission window opened. 3 hours into her approach, she reached the ridge line that would provide her firing position. The elevation was perfect, approximately 800 meters above the target compound, clear lines of sight to all buildings, natural concealment provided by rock formations that had been carved by wind and water over geological time scales. She spent 30 minutes conducting detailed reconnaissance before establishing her final position. Using her optics system, she studied every aspect of the target compound, noting defensive positions, guard patterns, potential complications that might affect her mission success. The compound was exactly as described in intelligence briefings, but seeing it through her rifle scope made everything more immediate and personal. Buildings that housed terrorists who were training to kill innocent Americans, defensive positions manned by guards who would kill her without hesitation if she was discovered, security measures designed to protect people whose ultimate goal was bringing death and destruction to American cities. Her firing position was ideal, a natural depression in the rock face that provided concealment from multiple directions, solid support for precision shooting, clear escape routes if her position became compromised. Someone had conducted excellent reconnaissance during mission planning, identifying a location that maximized her tactical advantages while minimizing exposure to enemy observation. She established her rifle position with methodical precision, ensuring perfect stability for the shots she'd need to make. The bipod legs were adjusted for optimal height and angle. The scope was aligned with mathematical precision. Every detail was the Kandahar airfield stretched endlessly under the Afghan sun, heat waves dancing off the tarmac like ghosts of the fallen. Major Lydia Ghost Reeves adjusted her flight helmet, fingers tracing the worn edges of a small metal badge pinned to her chest, a sniper's insignia that spoke of impossible distances and precision under pressure. Few noticed it beneath her pilot's wings. Fewer still understood what it meant. She'd been standing beside her Barrett .50 caliber rifle for 3 minutes when General Marcus Kine approached, his entourage trailing behind like eager shadows. The weapon gleamed in the morning light, its bipod legs splayed across a maintenance table where she'd been conducting her weekly inspection ritual. Most officers would have walked past without a second glance, another pilot playing with toys she'd probably never used in combat. Kine's boots hit the concrete with military precision, each step echoing across the flight line where F-16s and A-10 Warthogs sat in neat rows. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from too many wars and too many difficult decisions. Silver eagles adorned his collar, catching sunlight like small beacons of authority. He moved with purpose, reviewing the squadron's readiness reports, discussing logistics with his aide-de-camp about the morning's close air support missions over the Helmand province. But something made him stop. His eyes had caught the glint of metal on Reeves' uniform, not her pilot's wings or combat ribbons, but something smaller, more specific. The 3,200-meter marksmanship badge. Kine's expression shifted imperceptibly, decades of military experience recognizing a detail that didn't belong in the narrative most people would write about the woman before him. 3,200 meters, nearly 2 miles. The kind of shot that separated legends from mere marksmen, where wind speed, barometric pressure, and the Coriolis effect all conspired against success. The kind of distance where targets became mathematical equations rather than human silhouettes. "That's quite a badge, Major," Kine said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood its significance. Around them, the morning shift change continued. Mechanics wheeling equipment, pilots conducting pre-flight briefings, the controlled chaos of an active military installation preparing for another day of war. Reeves looked up from her rifle, meeting his gaze with eyes that held secrets the desert sun couldn't illuminate. "Yes, sir, it is." The general's aide shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to move along with their scheduled inspection. But Kine remained fixed in place, studying the woman who wore a sniper's badge beneath pilot's wings, sensing there was a story here that most people never bothered to ask about. In the distance, the call to morning briefing echoed across the flight line, but for a moment, time seemed suspended between the general's growing curiosity and the major's carefully guarded past. The heat shimmered, the story was about to begin. Ghost Reeves had earned her call sign the hard way, not through any single dramatic moment, but through a series of impossible shots that left enemies wondering if they were fighting phantoms. Her journey to the cockpit had been unconventional, carved through skepticism and prejudice with the precision of a well-placed round. Born in rural Montana to a family of hunters, Lydia had learned to shoot before she could properly tie her shoes. Her father, a Vietnam veteran turned ranch hand, had taught her that marksmanship was about more than pulling triggers. It was about understanding wind, patience, and the deadly mathematics of trajectory. By 16, she could place shots at distances that made grown men shake their heads in disbelief. But it was September 11th that changed everything. Like millions of Americans, she watched the towers fall from her high school cafeteria, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. The military recruiters who visited the following spring found a young woman with exceptional test scores and an almost supernatural ability with a rifle. Basic training at Fort Benning had been brutal, designed to break down civilian softness and rebuild military precision. Reeves excelled at everything except fitting in. Her fellow recruits couldn't reconcile the quiet girl from Montana who spoke softly but consistently outshot every instructor on the range. They called her Spooky at first, then Ghost, after she disappeared into woodland training exercises and emerged hours later having eliminated targets no one else could even locate. Sniper school at Fort Moore pushed her beyond human limitations. 18 months of crawling through mud, calculating wind drift, and learning to become invisible. Her instructors were former Delta Force and Marine Scout snipers who'd seen action in Desert Storm and Somalia. They tested her resolve with sleep deprivation, psychological pressure, and scenarios designed to simulate combat stress. The 3,200-meter shot had come during final qualification. A target the size of a dinner plate, wind gusting at 15 knots from the northwest, temperature differential creating thermal layers that bent light like funhouse mirrors. 3 attempts allowed. Most students aimed for center mass and hoped. Reeves had spent 20 minutes studying wind patterns through her scope, watching grass bend and dust swirl, calculating not just current conditions but predicting how they'd change in the 4 seconds her bullet would travel through space. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her heartbeat became a metronome counting down to the moment between breaths when the rifle would speak. The shot broke clean, the rifle's report echoing across the range like thunder. 4 seconds of silence followed, an eternity where trajectory met destiny. Then the spotting scope confirmed what everyone hoped but few believed. Center hit. Her instructors exchanged glances that spoke volumes about witnessing something extraordinary. The badge was more than recognition. It was admission to an exclusive club of warriors who could reach out and touch someone at distances most people couldn't even see clearly. But Reeves wanted more than a sniper's hide. She wanted wings. Military aviation had always been her secret dream, watching contrails streak across Montana's endless sky during childhood. The path from sniper to pilot wasn't traditional, but her test scores and demonstrated ability under pressure opened doors that remained closed to most. Flight school at Randolph Air Force Base tested different skills: spatial awareness, multitasking, the ability to make split-second decisions while pulling 4GS in a screaming turn. She excelled there too, though her instructors initially questioned whether someone who specialized in patience and precision could adapt to the dynamic chaos of aerial combat. Those doubts evaporated during her first live-fire exercise, when she threaded a Maverick missile through a canyon barely wider than her aircraft's wingspan to eliminate a simulated enemy position. By 2008, Major Lydia "Ghost" Reeves was flying A-10 Thunderbolts over Iraq, providing close air support for ground troops engaged with insurgents in Anbar province. The marriage of her sniper's eye with the Warthog's .30 cannon proved devastating to enemy forces. She could identify and engage targets that other pilots struggled to even locate, turning the ungainly aircraft into a precision instrument of destruction. Her reputation grew through radio chatter and after-action reports. Ground commanders specifically requested "Ghost" for dangerous missions, where accuracy meant the difference between mission success and friendly fire casualties. She flew 127 combat sorties in Iraq, each one adding another layer to the legend that would eventually bring her to Afghanistan and this moment under the desert sun. But legends, she'd learned, were just stories people told about events they didn't fully understand. The truth was always more complicated, more human, more fragile than the myths that grew around battlefield achievements. Standing beside her Barrett rifle while General Kynes studied her badge, Reeves wondered what story he was writing in his mind about the woman before him. The morning briefing call echoed again across the flight line, more insistent this time. Around them, the base continued its deadly dance of preparation: ordnance crews loading missiles, maintenance teams conducting final inspections, pilots reviewing target folders that contained someone's last moments reduced to grid coordinates and threat assessments. Kynes' aide-de-camp cleared his throat softly, a gentle reminder of the schedule's demands. But the general remained focused on the sniper's badge, understanding that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the spaces between official duties. His weathered fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit developed over 30 years of command decisions that sent young Americans into harm's way. "Where'd you earn it, Major?" he asked, nodding toward the badge. Reeves' eyes flicked toward the horizon where heat waves distorted the mountains like watercolor bleeding across canvas. Several places, sir. Iraq mostly. Few other locations I can't discuss without proper clearance levels. The general's expression suggested he already possessed those clearance levels, had read files that reduced extraordinary human achievements to classified paragraphs stamped with security classifications. But reading reports wasn't the same as standing face to face with the person who'd lived those moments when everything balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. Most pilots don't maintain marksmanship qualifications at that level, Kine observed, his tone carefully neutral. It wasn't quite a question, wasn't quite a statement, the kind of diplomatic probing that senior officers used when they suspected there were deeper currents beneath surface appearances. Most pilots don't need to, sir, Reeves replied, her hands unconsciously adjusting her rifle's scope covers with the automatic precision of muscle memory. Different skill sets for different mission requirements. But that wasn't entirely true, and both of them knew it. Maintaining sniper qualifications while serving as a combat pilot required extraordinary dedication, countless hours on ranges during leave time, a commitment to excellence that went far beyond military requirements. It spoke to something deeper than duty, a personal standard that refused to accept the comfortable mediocrity that claimed so many military careers. The truth was that Ghost Reeves couldn't let go of the rifle any more than she could stop flying. Both represented different aspects of the same fundamental drive, the need to reach out across impossible distances and make a difference. Whether that distance was measured in meters through a telescopic sight or miles from an aircraft cockpit, the principle remained constant. Precision mattered. Training mattered. When the moment came, there were no second chances. Kine seemed to sense this deeper truth. His eyes moved from the badge to her face, reading the kinds of details that most people missed. The way she carried herself, confident but not arrogant, alert but not paranoid. The small scars on her hands that spoke of hard training and harder missions. The way her gaze constantly swept the horizon, even during casual conversation, as if she were perpetually calculating ranges and wind speeds. "I have a mission briefing in 10 minutes, the general said finally, but I'd like to continue this conversation afterward. My office, 1400 hours. It wasn't a request. Reeves straightened to attention, recognizing the subtle shift from casual interest to official business. Yes, sir. As Kine walked away, his entourage falling into step behind him, she wondered what she'd revealed in their brief exchange. In her experience, when generals showed personal interest in individual soldiers, it usually meant one of two things: extraordinary opportunity or extraordinary trouble. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of jet fuel and dust across the flight line. Her radio crackled with the first mission assignments of the day. General Kine's office occupied the corner of a temporary building that had somehow become permanent over 8 years of continuous operations. The walls were covered with maps, unit photographs, and commendation certificates, the accumulated detritus of a career spent managing America's longest war. He sat behind a desk fashioned from ammunition crates and plywood, reviewing intelligence reports that painted an increasingly complex picture of enemy activities in the region. At precisely 1400 hours, Major Reeves knocked twice and entered when commanded. She moved with the controlled economy of someone accustomed to dangerous spaces, her eyes automatically cataloging exits and cover positions before focusing on the general. Old habits from a different kind of warfare. "Sit down, Major," Kine said, gesturing toward a folding chair that had probably seen service in 3 different countries. "Coffee." "Thank you, sir." She accepted the cup, noting how the general served it himself rather than summoning an aide, a small gesture that suggested this conversation would be more personal than official. Kine settled into his own chair, studying her over the rim of his coffee cup. The afternoon light streaming through dusty windows cast harsh shadows across his face, emphasizing the lines that 8 years of counterinsurgency warfare had carved there. Outside, the base hummed with its usual controlled chaos, helicopters departing on reconnaissance missions, convoy vehicles marshalling for supply runs, the constant background noise of a military installation that never truly slept. "I've been reading your file," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent considerable time reviewing classified documents. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. Sniper School Honor graduate, 217 confirmed kills over 3 deployments, transitioned to aviation with Distinguished Flying Cross for actions over Fallujah, combat pilot with 127 sorties and 0 friendly fire incidents. Reeves listened without expression, accustomed to having her career reduced to statistics and award citations. Numbers never captured the reality of those moments when everything balanced on the edge of a decision made under extreme pressure. They couldn't convey the weight of lives saved or the burden of lives taken, the sleepless nights when muscle memory jerked her awake reaching for weapons that weren't there. "But what interests me most," Kine continued, "is something that doesn't appear in your official records. 3 weeks ago, you volunteered for a search and rescue mission in the Hindu Kush. Taliban had shot down a Marine helicopter, crew status unknown, location approximately 40 kilometers inside hostile territory." The general paused, studying her reaction. Reeves kept her expression neutral, but her hands tightened slightly around the coffee cup. She remembered that mission with crystalline clarity, the kind of operation that lived in a pilot's memory long after the official reports were filed and forgotten. According to the after-action report, weather conditions were marginal at best. Visibility less than 2 miles, wind gusts up to 35 knots, enemy forces actively searching for the crash site. Most of our pilots would have considered the mission a calculated risk. A few would have called it borderline suicidal. Kine reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a folder marked with classification stamps. Inside were photographs, aerial reconnaissance images of mountainous terrain that looked more like the surface of an alien planet than anything on Earth. Steep valleys carved by millennia of erosion, peaks that disappeared into low-hanging clouds, terrain that had been breaking armies since Alexander the Great. "What the report doesn't mention," he continued, "is that you didn't just volunteer for the mission. You specifically requested permission to conduct the rescue using unconventional methods. Instead of following standard search patterns, you wanted to approach the crash site on foot, alone." Now Reeves' expression did shift, just slightly. A tightening around her eyes that suggested the general was approaching something she'd hoped would remain buried in classified files. The truth about that mission was more complex than any after-action report could capture, involving decisions that existed in the gray areas where official doctrine met battlefield reality. "Sir, the terrain made aerial extraction impossible," she said carefully. "Standard protocols would have required a full-scale ground assault with significant casualties. The situation demanded alternative approaches." "Alternative approaches," Kine repeated, his tone suggesting he found the euphemism inadequate. "Major, you hiked 14 kilometers through Taliban-controlled territory, carrying 40 pounds of medical equipment and communications gear. You located the crash site, provided emergency medical treatment to 2 severely injured Marines, and established a defensive perimeter using nothing but your personal weapons and whatever munitions you could salvage from the wreckage." The photographs in front of her showed the crash site from multiple angles, a twisted metal sculpture that had once been a CH-53 Super Stallion, now scattered across a rocky slope like the bones of some massive prehistoric beast. She remembered the smell of aviation fuel and burned electronics, the way morning light had filtered through smoke to illuminate the faces of Marines who'd thought they were going to die in those mountains. For 18 hours, you held that position against repeated enemy probes while coordinating rescue operations via satellite radio. When relief forces finally reached your location, They found evidence of at least 12 enemy casualties distributed in a perimeter, extending nearly 800 meters from the crash site. Kine reached for another photograph, this one showing a rocky outcropping with what appeared to be a spider's web of defensive positions carved into the stone. Care to explain how a single pilot managed to establish and maintain a defensive perimeter of that size? The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Reeves understood that her answer would determine the direction this conversation would take, possibly the direction her career would take. The general wasn't just curious. He was evaluating, testing, probing for something specific that existed beneath the surface of official reports and commendation citations. "Training, sir," she said finally, "and favorable terrain that allowed for maximum effectiveness of available resources." It was the kind of diplomatic non-answer that military officers used when they couldn't reveal operational details without violating security protocols. But both of them knew the truth was far more extraordinary than her modest description suggested. A single person didn't hold off determined enemy forces for 18 hours using conventional tactics. That kind of defensive success required something else entirely, skills that existed at the intersection of marksmanship, tactics, and the kind of battlefield intuition that couldn't be taught in any school. Kine closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Major, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. In your opinion, based on your unique combination of skills and experience, is there any tactical scenario where a single operator could conduct precision interdiction missions behind enemy lines with minimal support and maximum deniability?" The question was so specific, so carefully constructed, that Reeves understood immediately what the general was really asking. This wasn't about her past missions or her current duties as a combat pilot. This was about something else entirely, something that would push her abilities beyond anything she'd previously been asked to do. Outside the window, the afternoon light was beginning to fade toward evening, casting longer shadows across the flight line. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like distant thunder, a reminder that the war continued regardless of the conversations happening in temporary buildings scattered across forward operating bases. "Sir," she said slowly, "I believe there are tactical scenarios where unconventional approaches might prove more effective than traditional force deployment. But success would depend entirely on mission parameters, target identification, and exfiltration planning." "Hypothetically," Kine pressed, "if such a scenario existed, what would be the primary limiting factors?" Reeves considered the question, understanding that they were dancing around something classified, something that couldn't be discussed directly even in the general's secure office. Her answer would need to be precise enough to demonstrate competence, but vague enough to avoid revealing information she wasn't cleared to possess. "Intelligence gathering," she said finally, "target acquisition and positive identification at extended ranges, communication security during extended operations, and extraction under potentially hostile conditions." Kine nodded, as if her answer had confirmed something he'd already suspected. He reached for his coffee cup, but instead of drinking, he simply held it, using the gesture to buy time while he considered his next words. Whatever he was preparing to say would cross some kind of threshold, moving their conversation from hypothetical to operational. "Major Reeves, I'm going to read you into a program that officially doesn't exist. What I'm about to discuss cannot be repeated to anyone without explicit authorization. Not your squadron mates, not your family, not anyone. Do you understand?" She felt something cold settle in her stomach, recognizing the tone that senior officers used when they were about to change someone's life irrevocably. This was the moment when careers shifted into entirely different directions, when the comfortable certainty of established routines gave way to missions that existed in the shadowy spaces between official doctrine and battlefield necessity. "I understand, sir." Kine opened another folder, this one even more heavily classified than the previous documents. Inside were satellite photographs of terrain she didn't recognize, personnel files with faces blacked out, operational summaries that read like fiction, but carried the stamp of verified intelligence. 3 months ago, we identified a high-value target operating in the federally administered tribal areas along the Pakistani border, someone who's been coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region, someone whose elimination would significantly disrupt enemy operations. He passed her a photograph showing a compound built into mountainous terrain, its walls and buildings blending almost seamlessly with the rocky landscape. It looked more like a medieval fortress than a modern structure, designed to withstand both natural disasters and human assault. The problem, Kine continued, is location. This compound sits in territory where conventional military operations would create significant diplomatic complications. We can't send in special operations forces without risking international incidents. We can't use traditional airstrikes without collateral damage that would undermine broader strategic objectives. Reeves studied the photograph, her trained eye automatically analyzing approaches, defensive positions, likely fields of fire. Even from a satellite image, she could see that the compound had been designed by someone who understood military tactics. Every structure was positioned to provide overlapping coverage, every wall angled to deflect explosive force, every entrance designed to funnel attackers into predetermined kill zones. Sir, if conventional approaches aren't viable, what alternative are you considering? Kine's expression grew more serious, if that was possible. What I'm considering, Major, is whether a single highly skilled operator could infiltrate that region, conduct precision targeting of specific individuals, and exfiltrate without leaving evidence of American involvement. The words hung between them like a live electrical wire, carrying implications that extended far beyond military tactics into the realm of plausible deniability and political consequences. This wasn't about close air support or search and rescue missions. This was about something else entirely, something that existed in the spaces between war and diplomacy where traditional rules no longer applied. The operation would be completely unofficial, Kine continued. No military support, no extraction teams, no backup if things went wrong. Success would depend entirely on individual skill, preparation, and the ability to become invisible in hostile territory. Reeves felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the kind of anticipation that came with impossible challenges. This was what she'd been training for without knowing it, all those hours maintaining sniper qualifications while serving as a pilot, all that cross-training that had seemed excessive to her colleagues but had felt necessary to her. Sir, what kind of time frame are we discussing? Infiltration and target elimination within a 2-week window. Intelligence suggests our primary target will be meeting with several subordinate commanders to plan spring offensive operations. One shot, multiple high-value eliminations, maximum disruption of enemy command structure. The general reached for one final photograph, this one showing an individual in traditional Afghan clothing, standing on what appeared to be the compound's highest balcony. Even from the satellite's perspective, she could see he was tall, confident, someone accustomed to command, someone whose elimination would send shockwaves through every Taliban cell from Kandahar to Kabul. Major, Kine said quietly, I'm not ordering you to accept this mission. I'm asking if you believe it's possible and if so, whether you're willing to attempt it. Outside his office window, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of sunrise over Montana wheat fields. In a few hours, night missions would begin launching, routine patrols and reconnaissance flights that represented the visible face of America's involvement in Afghanistan. But this conversation was about something else entirely, something that would never appear in newspapers or history books. Reeves looked at the photographs spread across Kine's desk, each one representing a piece of a puzzle that could only be solved through precision, patience, and the willingness to disappear into hostile territory with nothing but skill and determination as protection. "Sir," she said finally, "I believe it's possible, and yes, I'm willing to try." The general nodded as if her answer had been inevitable, but his expression carried the weight of someone who understood the full implications of what he was asking. This wasn't just about military tactics or strategic objectives. It was about sending a single person into a situation where the margin for error was essentially zero. "There's something else you need to know," Kine said, his voice dropping even lower. "This operation isn't just about eliminating a single target. Intelligence suggests that this compound serves as more than just a meeting location. It's a training facility for a new generation of fighters who have been specifically recruited for attacks against American civilian targets." He pulled out another set of photographs, these showing younger men engaged in various training activities around the compound. Some were practicing with small arms, others working with what appeared to be improvised explosive devices, all under the supervision of older, more experienced instructors. "These aren't traditional Taliban fighters," Kine explained. "These are educated, motivated individuals who have been recruited from universities and technical schools across the region. They speak multiple languages, understand Western culture, and have been specifically trained to blend into American society while planning and executing large-scale terrorist attacks." The implications hit Reeves like a physical blow. This wasn't just about disrupting enemy operations in Afghanistan. This was about preventing attacks on American soil, attacks that could dwarf September 11th in their scope and devastating impact. The stakes suddenly extended far beyond military objectives into the realm of protecting innocent civilians who would never know how close they'd come to catastrophe. "How certain is this intelligence, sir?" "Certain enough that I'm willing to authorize an unofficial mission with no backup and minimal support," Kine replied grimly. "We've intercepted communications, identified financial transfers, confirmed the presence of technical experts who specialize in creating undetectable explosive devices. This compound isn't just training tomorrow's fighters, it's preparing tomorrow's terrorists." Reeves studied the photographs again, this time seeing them through the lens of homeland security rather than merely tactical objectives. Each young face represented potential attacks on shopping malls, airports, schools, soft targets where innocent Americans went about their daily lives without ever considering that they might be walking into carefully planned killing zones. "Sir, if this intelligence is accurate, why isn't this being handled through official channels? Special Operations has the capability to conduct this type of mission." Kine's expression grew even more serious. "Because official operations would require Pakistani government cooperation, and we have reason to believe that elements within Pakistani intelligence are actively protecting this facility. Any official mission would be compromised before it began, allowing the terrorists to disperse to secondary locations where we'd lose track of them entirely." The political complexity was staggering. Pakistan was officially an ally in the war on terror, but everyone understood that significant portions of their military and intelligence services maintained relationships with Taliban and al-Qaeda elements that dated back decades. Official military operations would trigger diplomatic protocols that would inevitably warn the very people they were trying to eliminate. "An unofficial mission," Kine continued, "conducted by someone who officially doesn't exist in that operational area, eliminates those political complications. If the mission succeeds, terrorist capabilities are severely degraded. If the mission fails—" He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "If the mission fails, there's no official American involvement to complicate diplomatic relationships." The euphemism was clear enough. If she was captured or killed, the United States government would disavow any knowledge of her activities. She would become a rogue operator who had acted without authorization, her death or capture an unfortunate example of individual decision-making rather than official policy. I understand, sir. Major, I need you to understand something else. This mission would require you to operate completely outside your comfort zone. You'd be infiltrating on foot through terrain that makes Afghanistan look like a public park. You'd be carrying equipment that you've never trained with, using weapons systems that technically don't exist, relying on intelligence that may be incomplete or deliberately misleading. Kine opened yet another folder, this one containing technical specifications for equipment she'd never seen before. Rifles that appeared to be standard military issue, but contained modifications that pushed ballistic performance far beyond normal capabilities. Communication devices that looked like consumer electronics, but contained encryption capabilities that rivaled classified satellite systems. Everything would be designed to appear completely innocent if discovered during border inspections or random searches. Your cover identity would be that of a freelance journalist documenting traditional crafts in remote mountain villages. Your equipment would be disguised as camera gear, hiking supplies, and research materials. The level of preparation was extraordinary, suggesting that planning for this mission had been underway for months before her conversation with the general. Someone had identified her as a potential candidate long before she'd volunteered for that search and rescue mission in the Hindu Kush. "Sir, how long have you been considering me for this operation?" Kine smiled slightly, the first expression of humor she'd seen from him during their entire conversation. "Major, your reputation preceded you to Afghanistan. Your actions in Iraq were noticed by people who specialize in impossible missions. That search and rescue operation 3 weeks ago wasn't just impressive military action. It was an extended field evaluation to determine whether you could operate independently in hostile territory." The revelation was unsettling. She thought she was volunteering to save fellow Americans in trouble, but apparently she'd been unknowingly auditioning for something far more complex and dangerous. Every decision she'd made during those 18 hours in the mountains had been observed, analyzed, and evaluated by people she'd never met for purposes she'd never suspected. The mission timeline would begin in 72 hours, Kine continued, apparently taking her silence as acceptance rather than hesitation. You'd fly commercially to Dubai, then overland through Iran using documentation that will appear completely legitimate but will actually be managed by people whose existence I can't acknowledge. Outside the window, full darkness had settled over the base. Night missions were launching, the distinctive whine of jet engines spinning up, the controlled urgency of ground crews conducting final inspections under floodlights that turned the flight line into a stage for America's technological superiority. But the mission Kine was describing would involve none of that technological advantage. No satellite navigation, no real-time intelligence updates, no extraction teams standing by to provide support if everything went wrong. Just one person, moving through hostile territory, carrying nothing but skill and determination toward a target that represented a direct threat to innocent Americans. "Sir, I'll need detailed topographical maps, weather forecasting for the operational period, and current intelligence on enemy patrol patterns in the infiltration corridor." Kine nodded, understanding that her request for tactical details represented acceptance of the mission rather than mere curiosity. "Everything you need will be provided during your final briefing. But Major, I want you to understand something. Once you accept this mission, there's no changing your mind. Too many moving parts, too many people at risk, too much at stake." Reeves thought about the photographs of young terrorists training in that remote compound, preparing to bring death and destruction to American cities. She thought about her oath as a military officer, sworn to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She thought about her father, who taught her that some shots were so important that missing wasn't an option. I understand, sir, and I accept. The general reached across his desk and shook her hand, his grip firm and steady despite the weight of what he was asking her to do. Ghost, I hope you understand what you're volunteering for. This isn't just another mission. This is the kind of operation that will define the rest of your life, regardless of the outcome. Standing to leave, Reeves felt the weight of her decision settling around her like a heavy cloak. In 72 hours, she would disappear from everything familiar and safe, carrying nothing but her skills and determination into territory where discovery meant death and failure might cost thousands of innocent lives. Sir, there's one thing I need to know. If this mission succeeds, if the target is eliminated and the terrorist training is disrupted, will anyone ever know what happened? Kine's expression grew distant, the look of someone who'd spent decades keeping secrets that would never appear in any history book. Major, the most important victories in this war will never be celebrated because they prevent tragedies that never happen. Success in this mission means that somewhere, someday, innocent Americans will go about their daily lives without ever knowing how close they came to disaster. She nodded, understanding that the greatest achievement would be measured not in recognition or awards, but in newspaper headlines that would never be written, memorial services that would never be held, families that would never be shattered by terrorist attacks. Walking across the darkened flight line toward her quarters, Ghost Reeves looked up at the stars that had guided hunters and warriors since the beginning of human history. In 72 hours, she would be navigating by those same stars through terrain that had been challenging travelers since Alexander the Great first tried to conquer Afghanistan's impossible mountains. But for tonight, she had preparations to make, and a legacy to preserve through one perfect shot across an impossible distance. The armory at Kandahar held secrets that most personnel never suspected existed. 3 levels below the main weapons storage facility, behind doors that required fingerprint scanners and classified access codes, lay equipment that officially didn't exist in any military inventory system. Ghost Reeves followed Master Sergeant Carlos Vega through corridors lined with cases containing devices that push the boundaries of current technology. Major, what you're about to see has never been issued to conventional military units, Vega explained, his voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone who'd spent his career working with experimental weapons systems. Everything in this facility was developed specifically for operations that require absolute deniability. They stopped before a case containing what appeared to be a standard hunting rifle, something a civilian might use for elk hunting in Colorado or deer hunting in Pennsylvania. But Reeves' trained eye immediately noticed details that marked it as something far more sophisticated than sporting equipment. Remington 700 action, but that's where the similarities end, Vega continued, lifting the weapon with the reverence reserved for precision instruments. Custom barrel manufactured from materials I'm not authorized to discuss. Optic system that provides ballistic calculation, range finding, and wind speed analysis integrated into what appears to be a standard hunting scope. He handed her the rifle, and she immediately felt the difference. The balance was perfect, the weight distributed in a way that suggested extensive computer modeling and precision manufacturing. The stock felt familiar but carried subtle modifications that would allow for more precise adjustment under field conditions. Effective range, she asked, running her fingers along the barrel's length. Verified accuracy beyond 4,000 meters under optimal conditions. But for this mission, you'll be engaging targets at much closer ranges where absolute precision is more important than maximum distance. Vega moved to another case, this one containing what appeared to be a standard photographer's equipment bag, cameras, lenses, tripods, all bearing manufacturer labels that would pass casual inspection. But when he opened the bag, Reeves saw how each piece of equipment had been modified to serve dual purposes. Camera lens that functions as spotting scope, he explained, lifting a telephoto lens that felt surprisingly heavy, tripod legs that separate into a rifle bipod system, film containers that actually hold precision ammunition manufactured to specifications I can't discuss without additional security clearances. The level of engineering was extraordinary. Someone had spent considerable time and resources creating equipment that would allow a sniper to operate in hostile territory while maintaining perfect cover identity. Every detail had been considered, from the wear patterns on the camera body to the type of dust accumulated in the equipment bag. What about communications? Satellite phone disguised as a portable radio for recording local music, Vega replied, showing her a device that looked exactly like something a journalist might carry for documenting traditional songs and interviews with local artisans. Encrypted capability with burst transmission functions that minimize detection probability. They moved deeper into the facility, past cases containing equipment she didn't recognize, devices that looked like consumer electronics but obviously served functions far beyond their apparent purposes. The investment represented by this single room suggested operations far more extensive than any individual mission. Major, there's something else you need to understand about this equipment, Vega said, his expression growing more serious. Everything you'll be carrying has been designed with a specific operational parameter. If you're captured or compromised, nothing can be traced back to American manufacturing or military specifications. He showed her a small device that looked like a digital camera battery, but contained enough explosive to destroy all equipment within a 15-meter radius. Dead man's switch, biometrically coded to your fingerprint. If activated, it provides 30 seconds to clear the blast radius before eliminating all evidence of the mission. The implications were sobering. She would be carrying her own destruction, a final guarantee that even death wouldn't compromise operational security or reveal American involvement. It was the ultimate expression of deniable operations. Even the operator could be disavowed through controlled destruction. Vega, how many people have carried equipment from this facility? The master sergeant paused, clearly considering how much he was authorized to reveal. Major, in my 8 years managing this facility, you're the 14th operator to be issued mission-specific equipment. 7 successful operations, complete target elimination with 0 detection. 4 operations aborted due to intelligence changes or political complications. 2 operations. He paused again. 2 operators didn't return. The mathematics of covert operations were brutal in their simplicity. 14 people had attempted missions similar to what she was about to undertake. 2 had died in hostile territory, their bodies never recovered, their families probably told they'd been killed in training accidents or routine operations that went wrong. What happened to their equipment? Sterilization protocols functioned as designed, Vega replied diplomatically. No operational security was compromised. Ghost understood the euphemism. Those 2 operators had activated their dead man switches, destroying themselves and their equipment to prevent enemy forces from discovering American involvement. They'd chosen death over capture, following protocols that existed in the gray areas where traditional military doctrine met the harsh realities of covert operations. Major, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, Vega continued, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. Are you prepared to activate that device if the mission becomes compromised beyond recovery? The question hung between them like a challenge. She'd accepted the mission understanding that capture was impossible and extraction wasn't guaranteed. But confronting the specific mechanism of her own potential destruction made everything more concrete, more final. Yes, she said simply. Vega nodded, apparently satisfied with her response. He moved to the final case in their tour, this one containing items that looked completely innocent: hiking boots, outdoor clothing, a backpack that could belong to any serious mountain climber or wilderness photographer. Everything has been manufactured or modified to support your cover identity, he explained, showing her how the boots contained hidden compartments for emergency supplies, how the jacket contained communication wires woven into seemingly decorative stitching, how the backpack frame could be disassembled into components for the rifle's bipod system. The attention to detail is incredible, she observed, examining stitching that looked hand-done but probably represented hours of precise manufacturing to achieve the proper appearance of age and use. Major, people's lives depend on these details. Your life depends on these details. Someone spent 6 months aging this equipment to achieve the exact appearance of gear that's been used extensively, but maintained properly by someone who depends on reliable equipment. They completed their tour at a desk where Vega had laid out her complete mission package, every piece of equipment she'd carry into hostile territory, organized with military precision. The rifle case looked like expensive photography equipment. The ammunition looked like film canisters. The communication device looked like a journalist's recording equipment. Final briefing is tomorrow at 600, Vega said. After that, you'll have 12 hours to familiarize yourself with all equipment before departure. Major, I want you to understand something. This equipment represents the absolute cutting edge of covert operations technology, but it's only as good as the person using it. Walking back through the underground corridors toward the surface, Ghost felt the weight of tomorrow's briefing settling around her like a familiar uniform. She'd spent her entire military career preparing for missions that pushed the boundaries of human capability. But this operation represented something entirely different. A mission where failure would be measured not in military objectives, but in innocent lives lost to terrorist attacks. Back in her quarters, she spent the night cleaning her personal sidearm and reviewing topographical maps of terrain she'd never seen. The mountains along the Pakistani border looked like the surface of an alien world, peaks that disappeared into clouds, valleys carved by glacial action over millions of years, terrain that had been defeating armies since humanity first learned to make war. But somewhere in those impossible mountains, terrorists were training to bring death and destruction to American cities. And in less than 48 hours, she would be moving through that terrain with nothing but skill and determination, carrying the hopes of people who would never know her name or understand what she'd sacrificed to keep them safe. The final briefing took place in a secure conference room that existed 3 levels below General Kine's office. No windows, no natural light, just maps and photographs spread across tables under harsh fluorescent illumination that made everything look like crime scene evidence. Ghost entered to find herself facing not just Kine, but 3 other individuals whose presence immediately marked this operation as far more complex than she'd initially understood. Major Reeves, I'd like you to meet your operational support team, Kine said, gesturing toward a woman in civilian clothes who looked like she belonged at a university rather than a military briefing. Dr. Sarah Chen, our regional intelligence specialist. Chen stepped forward with the confident handshake of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. Major, I've been monitoring communications traffic and movement patterns in your operational area for the past 6 months. What we're seeing suggests a significant acceleration in training activities and coordination with external terrorist networks. The second individual was introduced as Mr. Smith, obviously not his real name, who carried himself with the quiet intensity of someone who specialized in operations that never appeared in official records. His handshake was firm, his eyes constantly evaluating, the kind of person who automatically cataloged exits and threat vectors even in secure facilities. Smith handles operational logistics and emergency protocols, Kine explained. If everything goes according to plan, you'll never interact with him again after this briefing. If things go wrong, he's your lifeline to extraction possibilities that officially don't exist. The third individual introduced himself as Captain James Rodriguez, and his uniform bore the insignia of military intelligence. Major, I'll be coordinating real-time intelligence support during your operational window. Limited communication, burst transmissions only, but I'll be monitoring enemy communications and movement patterns to provide tactical updates if circumstances change dramatically. The presence of a full support team was both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it suggested extensive planning and preparation. Concerning because it indicated the mission's importance extended far beyond a simple assassination to something that could impact national security at the highest levels. Let's begin with current intelligence, Chen said, activating a digital projection system that filled one wall with satellite imagery. The compound you'll be targeting sits at approximately 3,400 meters elevation, built into terrain that provides natural defensive advantages, but also creates opportunities for long-range engagement. The images showed the target area in extraordinary detail: individual buildings, defensive positions, even what appeared to be guard posts positioned to monitor approaches from multiple directions. Someone had spent considerable time and resources documenting every aspect of the facility's layout and defensive preparations. Current intelligence suggests between 40 and 60 individuals present at any given time, Chen continued. Mix of senior Taliban commanders, foreign technical advisors, and approximately 20 younger recruits who represent the next generation of terrorist operatives specifically trained for attacks against Western civilian targets. Rodriguez activated another display showing communication intercepts, fragments of conversation translated from multiple languages, financial transactions traced through international banking networks, travel patterns that painted a picture of a sophisticated organization with resources that extended far beyond traditional Taliban capabilities. Major, what makes this target particularly dangerous is the international coordination we're observing, Rodriguez explained. These aren't just local fighters planning regional attacks. We're seeing evidence of coordination with terrorist cells in Europe, coordination with technical experts who specialize in creating undetectable explosive devices, coordination with individuals who have established identities and legitimate access to American territory. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just about disrupting Taliban operations in Afghanistan. This was about preventing a new generation of terrorist attacks that could make September 11th look like a preliminary exercise. The young men being trained in that remote compound weren't just learning to fight coalition forces. They were learning to blend into Western society while planning mass casualty attacks against innocent civilians. Smith briefed the major on extraction protocols, Kine said. Smith stepped forward, his expression completely neutral. Major, under optimal conditions, mission duration should not exceed 72 hours from infiltration to exfiltration. You'll be inserted via commercial transportation to predetermined coordinates, then proceed overland using routes that have been scouted and determined to minimize contact with enemy forces. He showed her a map marking her infiltration route, a winding path through terrain that looked like it had been carved by prehistoric glaciers. Every kilometer was marked with waypoints, emergency shelter locations, and communication windows where she could make brief contact with support elements. Extraction will occur at coordinates you'll memorize, but that won't appear on any written materials you carry, Smith continued. Helicopter pickup during a predetermined window, weather permitting. If weather conditions prevent aerial extraction, overland routes to secondary pickup points have been established and briefed to backup support elements. The contingency planning was extensive, but Ghost noticed that every backup plan still depended on her ability to move independently through hostile territory. There were no rescue teams standing by, no quick reaction forces positioned to provide support if everything went wrong. Success or failure would depend entirely on her individual capabilities. What if I'm wounded during the operation? she asked. Smith's expression didn't change. Major, given the political sensitivity of this operation, wounded personnel cannot be extracted through official channels. You need to reach extraction coordinates under your own power, regardless of your physical condition. The statement was delivered without emotion, but its implications were clear. If she was seriously wounded during the operation, she would be left to die in hostile territory rather than risk exposure of American involvement. It was another reminder that this mission existed in the gray areas where traditional military support systems didn't apply. Dr. Chen briefed the major on target identification and engagement priorities, Kind said. Chen activated another display, this one showing individual photographs of the terrorist leaders who would be present during her operational window. Faces that intelligence agencies had been tracking for months, individuals whose elimination would significantly disrupt terrorist operations throughout the region. Primary target is Abdullah Nazir, senior Taliban commander who's been coordinating attacks against coalition forces for the past 18 months, Chen said, pointing to a photograph of a bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing. Intelligence suggests he'll be meeting with subordinate commanders to plan spring offensive operations, providing an opportunity to eliminate multiple high-value targets simultaneously. She showed additional photographs, younger men whose faces carried the confidence of people who believed they were fighting for righteous causes. These individuals represent the next generation of terrorist leadership, specifically recruited and trained for operations against Western civilian targets. Their elimination would significantly degrade terrorist capabilities for years to come. The photographs were remarkably clear, suggesting intelligence assets positioned close enough to photograph individual terrorists without being detected. Someone had been watching this compound for months, documenting activities and identifying targets with precision that suggested extensive human intelligence networks. Major, your mission will occur during a 3-day window when these individuals will be gathered for coordination meetings, Rodriguez added. Intelligence suggests they meet monthly to coordinate operations, share technical expertise, and plan future attacks. Eliminating them during one of these meetings would represent a significant blow to terrorist capabilities. Ghost studied the photographs, memorizing faces that would soon appear in her rifle scope. Each face represented someone who'd chosen to dedicate their life to killing innocent Americans, someone whose death would prevent future tragedies that might claim hundreds or thousands of civilian lives. Engagement distance will be approximately 1,200 meters from the compound's main building, Smith said, showing her detailed topographical maps of her firing position. Elevated position with clear lines of sight, natural concealment, and multiple escape routes if your position becomes compromised. The tactical situation was ideal for long-range precision shooting, elevated firing position, clear sight lines, predictable target behavior. Under normal circumstances, it would represent a textbook sniper engagement with high probability of success and minimal risk of detection. However, Smith continued, you need to understand that this firing position is located in territory that Pakistani military patrols regularly. If you're discovered by Pakistani forces, extraction becomes significantly more complicated. Kine leaned forward, his expression serious. Major, I need you to understand the political complexities involved in this operation. Pakistan is officially our ally, but significant elements within their military and intelligence services actively support Taliban operations. If you're captured by Pakistani forces, we cannot acknowledge your presence in their territory or provide official support for your release. The political complexity added another layer of risk to an already dangerous mission. Not only would she be operating in hostile territory controlled by Taliban forces, but she'd also be operating illegally in the territory of an official American ally who might be secretly supporting the very terrorists she was targeting. Sir, What are the rules of engagement if I encounter Pakistani military forces? Avoid contact at all costs, Kine replied immediately. Under no circumstances can this operation result in casualties among Pakistani military personnel. That would create diplomatic complications that could destabilize our entire regional strategy. So she would be operating in territory where Taliban forces were legitimate targets, Pakistani forces were completely off-limits, and civilian casualties were unacceptable. The rules of engagement were clear but operationally challenging. She'd need to achieve perfect target identification and engagement under conditions where mistakes could have international consequences. Major, there's one final aspect of this mission we need to discuss, Chen said, her expression growing even more serious. Recent intelligence suggests that the compound may be hosting a special guest during your operational window, someone whose presence would make this mission even more critical. She activated another display showing a photograph that made Ghost's breath catch. The face was familiar from countless intelligence briefings, wanted posters, and FBI most wanted lists. Someone whose capture or elimination had been a priority objective for intelligence agencies worldwide. We believe this individual will be present to provide technical training in advanced explosive devices specifically designed to defeat airport security systems, Chen continued. His elimination, combined with the destruction of the training facility, could prevent terrorist attacks that might claim thousands of innocent lives. The stakes had just increased exponentially. This wasn't just about disrupting local Taliban operations or eliminating regional terrorist leaders. This was about preventing the next major terrorist attack against American civilians, an attack that could make September 11th look like a preliminary exercise. Ghost looked around the conference room at faces that carried the weight of classified knowledge and impossible decisions. These people were asking her to infiltrate hostile territory, eliminate multiple high-value targets, and exfiltrate without leaving any evidence of American involvement. Success could prevent thousands of deaths. Failure could compromise ongoing intelligence operations and destabilize regional diplomatic relationships. I understand the mission requirements, she said finally. When do I depart? 1800 hours today, Smith replied. Commercial flight to Dubai, then overland transportation to your infiltration coordinates. Mission window opens in 96 hours. Kine stood, indicating the briefing was concluded. Major, I want you to understand something. What you're about to attempt represents the kind of operation that defines careers and changes history. Most people will never know what you've done, but the lives you save will ripple through generations of American families who'll go about their daily lives without ever knowing how close they came to tragedy. Walking back to her quarters to collect her equipment, Ghost felt the weight of approaching departure settling around her like the gear she'd soon be carrying into hostile territory. In 6 hours, she'd board a commercial airliner as a freelance journalist researching traditional crafts in remote mountain villages. In 96 hours, she'd be lying in a concealed firing position, looking through a rifle scope at terrorists who were planning to bring death and destruction to innocent Americans. The transition from military base to operational deployment always carried a surreal quality, moving from the controlled environment of briefing rooms and equipment checks into the unpredictable chaos of hostile territory, where survival depended entirely on training, preparation, and the ability to make correct decisions under extreme pressure. But this mission was different from anything she'd previously attempted. No backup, no support, no extraction if everything went wrong. Just one person, carrying specialized equipment through terrain that had been defeating armies since Alexander the Great, toward a target that represented a direct threat to American homeland security. The commercial flight from Kandahar to Dubai represented the strangest 8 hours of Ghost's military career. Sitting in economy class among business travelers and tourists, Wearing civilian clothes and carrying nothing but a photographer's equipment bag, she felt completely disconnected from the military world she'd inhabited for the past decade. No uniform, no rank insignia, no visible connection to the mission that would soon take her into hostile territory. Her cover documentation identified her as Linda Matthews, a freelance photojournalist specializing in traditional mountain crafts. Her passport contained entry stamps from countries where such a person might reasonably travel: Nepal for Himalayan textiles, Peru for Andean weaving techniques, Morocco for Berber carpet traditions. Someone had spent considerable time creating a believable background that would withstand casual scrutiny. The equipment bag contained everything she'd been issued in the underground armory, but disguised so completely that even airport security personnel had treated her like any other photographer traveling with expensive, but completely innocent gear. The rifle case looked like a telescoping tripod system. The precision ammunition looked like camera film stored in protective containers. The satellite communication device looked like a portable recorder for documenting traditional music. During the flight, she reviewed her cover story until it became second nature. Linda Matthews, 34 years old, freelance journalist with a master's degree in cultural anthropology from the University of Colorado, specializing in documenting traditional crafts in remote mountain communities, particularly weaving techniques and metalworking that hadn't changed significantly over centuries. It was a perfect cover for someone who needed legitimate reasons to visit isolated villages, carry expensive optical equipment, and spend extended periods in mountainous terrain taking detailed photographs. Someone whose work would naturally require hiking to remote locations carrying substantial equipment loads. The flight landed in Dubai just before dawn, and Ghost found herself in the surreal environment of one of the world's busiest international airports. Glass and steel architecture that could have belonged to a science fiction movie, travelers from every continent speaking dozens of languages, the constant background hum of international commerce conducted at the speed of digital transactions. Her contact in Dubai was waiting at the designated location, a coffee shop in the international terminal where someone with her background would naturally stop for refreshment before continuing to a connecting flight. The contact was a woman who looked like any other business traveler, someone whose appearance would be forgotten within minutes of a casual encounter. "Ms. Matthews," the woman said, approaching her table, "I'm Sarah Kim from Mountain Heritage magazine. We spoke about the photo spread on traditional Central Asian crafts." It was the predetermined recognition sequence, delivered with the casual friendliness of two professionals meeting for the first time. Ghost responded with the appropriate countersign, confirming her identity without using any names or references that might be remembered by casual observers. "Thank you for meeting me," Ghost replied. "I'm looking forward to this assignment. The crafts traditions in those mountain communities are supposed to be extraordinary." Sarah Kim handed her a business card and a manila envelope that could have contained travel arrangements or story assignments. "Your transportation arrangements are confirmed. The driver will meet you at the address printed on the card. He'll have additional equipment you requested for the mountain photography." Inside the envelope were travel documents for the overland portion of her journey, visa stamps that would allow her to travel through Iran toward the Afghan border, letters of introduction from cultural organizations that would provide credible reasons for her presence in sensitive border regions, contact information for local guides who were actually intelligence assets positioned to provide support if circumstances changed. "Is there anything else you need for the assignment?" Sarah asked, her tone suggesting this was merely a routine conversation between magazine editor and freelance photographer. "I think everything's been covered," Ghost replied. "I'll send regular updates on my progress, but you know how unreliable communication can be in those remote areas." It was a coded reference to the limited communication windows that had been established for her mission. Regular check-ins weren't possible given the security requirements, but predetermined communication schedules would allow her to provide minimal status updates without compromising operational security. Sarah Kim smiled and stood to leave. "Well, good luck with the assignment. I'm sure the magazine's readers will find your work fascinating." Then she was gone, disappearing into the anonymous crowd of international travelers. Ghost remained at the coffee shop for another 10 minutes, studying her travel documents and mentally reviewing the next phase of her journey. From Dubai to Tehran via Iran Air, then overland transportation through increasingly remote terrain toward the border regions where her real mission would begin. The transition from major international airport to rural Iranian countryside occurred with startling suddenness. One moment she was surrounded by the glass and steel modernity of Tehran's airport. The next she was sitting in a decades-old Land Rover driving through landscape that looked like it hadn't changed substantially since medieval times. Her driver introduced himself as Mahmoud, a weathered man in his 50s who spoke excellent English and claimed to specialize in guiding researchers to remote mountain communities. His vehicle was loaded with supplies for extended travel in harsh terrain, extra fuel, emergency food, mechanical tools, everything needed for self-sufficient travel through areas where assistance wouldn't be available. "Ms. Matthews, you are interested in traditional metalworking, yes?" Mahmoud asked as they drove through increasingly mountainous terrain. "The communities we will visit maintain techniques that have been unchanged for many centuries." It was more than casual conversation. Mahmoud was testing her knowledge of her cover story, ensuring she could discuss her supposed specialty with sufficient expertise to convince anyone they might encounter. Ghost had memorized enough information about traditional crafts to maintain her cover, but she appreciated his thoroughness in verifying her preparation. "I'm particularly interested in how metalworking techniques adapted to local ore sources," she replied, drawing on research she'd conducted during her preparation. Each region developed unique approaches based on available materials and fuel sources. They drove for 12 hours, stopping only for fuel and meals at roadside establishments that looked like they served travelers crossing these mountains for thousands of years. Mahmoud proved to be an excellent guide, knowledgeable about local customs, and careful to ensure their journey appeared completely routine to anyone who might be observing. As they approached the border regions, the terrain became increasingly dramatic. Peaks that disappeared into clouds, valleys carved by glacial action over millions of years, landscape that dwarfed human activity into insignificant specks moving across geological scales of time and distance. It was country that had been challenging travelers since humanity first learned to cross mountain passes. "Tomorrow we enter more sensitive areas," Mahmoud explained as they stopped for the night at a guest house that looked like it had been serving travelers for centuries. Border regions where security forces from several countries maintain patrols. We must be very careful to follow established routes and avoid any appearance of suspicious activity. The guest house was basic but clean, the kind of place where legitimate researchers might stay while studying remote communities. Other guests included what appeared to be actual anthropologists, geologists conducting mineral surveys, and aid workers traveling between isolated villages. Ghost's presence attracted no unusual attention. That night, she reviewed her operational timeline one final time. 48 hours to her infiltration coordinates, then approximately 6 hours of overland movement to reach her firing position. The mission window would open in 60 hours, weather permitting. After that, she'd have approximately 12 hours to complete target elimination and reach her extraction coordinates. Looking up at stars that had guided travelers through these mountains since before recorded history, Ghost felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over her. Tomorrow, she would begin the transition from cover identity to operational mode, moving from the relatively safe world of documented travel into hostile territory, where discovery meant death and failure could cost thousands of innocent lives. But tonight, she was still Linda Matthews, freelance photographer researching traditional crafts in mountain communities. Tomorrow, she would begin becoming something else entirely. The final day of overland travel took them through terrain that challenged even Mahmoud's experienced driving. Mountain passes that seemed barely wide enough for their vehicle, roads that were more suggestions than actual routes, bridges that looked like they'd been built by Roman engineers and maintained through hope and prayer. This region has always been difficult, Mahmoud explained as they navigated a particularly treacherous switchback that dropped away into a valley so deep its bottom disappeared into shadows. Even Alexander the Great found these mountains challenging. Local tribes have been using the terrain to their advantage for thousands of years. It was an appropriate observation. The same geographical features that had defeated ancient armies would provide the concealment and defensive advantages she'd need during her mission. Terrain that channeled movement into predictable routes, elevation that provided commanding fields of fire, natural shelter that could hide someone with the patience to remain motionless for extended periods. They reached her final waypoint as the sun was setting behind peaks that looked like the backbone of the earth itself. The location appeared completely unremarkable, a cluster of traditional buildings that could have been serving travelers for centuries, maintained by families whose ancestors had been providing shelter and supplies to people crossing these mountains since before written history. "Ms. Matthews, this is where our journey together ends," Mahmoud said, beginning to unload her equipment from his vehicle. "From here, local guides will assist you in reaching the mountain communities where you'll conduct your research." The local guide was waiting inside the guest house, a man who introduced himself as Ahmed and claimed extensive knowledge of trails leading to isolated villages where traditional crafts were still practiced. But Ghost immediately recognized qualities that marked him as something more than a simple mountain guide. The way he moved, the way his eyes automatically evaluated terrain and approaches, the way he carried himself despite wearing traditional local clothing, everything suggested military training and operational experience. He was obviously an intelligence asset, positioned to provide the final phase of support before she transitioned to independent operation. "Ms. Matthews, I understand you wish to visit very remote communities," Ahmed said after Mahmoud had departed. "These villages are difficult to reach, requiring several days of mountain travel. Are you prepared for such challenging conditions?" It was another test, ensuring she understood what she was committed to. Once they left this final waypoint, there would be no opportunity to change her mind, no possibility of comfortable retreat if she decided the mission was too dangerous. "I've traveled in challenging mountain environments before," she replied. "My work requires visiting communities that most researchers never reach." That night, she made her final transition from cover identity to operational readiness. The photography equipment was disassembled and reconfigured into its actual components. The precision rifle, the advanced optics system, the communication device that would provide her only link to extraction support. Ahmed proved to be a professional, helping her organize equipment for maximum efficiency during the mountain approach while maintaining perfect operational security. He'd obviously supported similar missions, understanding the critical importance of every detail from weight distribution to concealment techniques. "The weather forecast is favorable for the next 72 hours, he reported, reviewing information he'd received through channels she wasn't cleared to understand. "Clear skies, minimal wind, visibility extending beyond your maximum engagement range. Perfect conditions for precision shooting, but also perfect conditions for enemy observation." She'd need to approach her firing position with extreme caution, using every available feature of the terrain to remain invisible to security forces that might be patrolling the area. "Ahmed, what's the current intelligence on enemy patrol patterns in the operational area?" Taliban forces maintain irregular patrols, primarily focused on main travel routes, he replied. Pakistani military conducts border security operations, but these follow predictable schedules that can be avoided with proper timing. The route we'll use has been scouted extensively and determined to minimize contact probability. They spent 2 hours reviewing her approach route, memorizing waypoints and escape routes, discussing contingency plans for various scenarios that might require rapid changes to her operational timeline. Ahmed's knowledge of the terrain was extraordinary, suggesting months of preparation and reconnaissance. "Ms. Matthews, there is something else you should know," Ahmed said, his expression growing more serious. "Recent intelligence suggests increased security activity around your target area. Additional guards, modified patrol patterns, possible early warning systems that weren't present during initial reconnaissance." The information was concerning but not unexpected. High-value targets rarely remained completely static, and any competent security force would periodically modify their protective measures. She'd operated in similar environments before, where success required adapting to changing conditions rather than relying on predetermined plans. "How recent is this intelligence?" 48 hours. But conditions in this region change rapidly, and communication delays mean our information may not reflect current reality. It was another reminder that she'd be operating with incomplete information, forced to make critical decisions based on observations and analysis conducted under operational conditions. No amount of planning could eliminate the uncertainties that came with missions in hostile territory. They departed before dawn, moving through terrain that looked like it belonged on another planet. Peaks that disappeared into morning mist, valleys carved by geological forces over millions of years, landscape that dwarfed human activity into insignificant movement across scales of time and distance that made individual lives seem temporary as morning dew. Ahmed led them along routes that weren't visible to untrained observers, paths that followed natural features of the terrain, taking advantage of concealment provided by rock formations and vegetation patterns. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew every stone and shadow, someone whose survival had depended on understanding how to remain invisible in hostile territory. After 6 hours of mountain travel, they reached the final waypoint before she'd continue alone. A natural shelter formed by massive rock formations, protected from observation and weather, stocked with supplies that would sustain her during the operational phase of her mission. "From here, your target area is approximately 4 kilometers, Ahmed explained, showing her landmarks she'd use for final navigation. "Travel time depends on your approach route and security considerations, but you should reach your firing position well before the mission window opens." He handed her a final intelligence update, delivered through communication channels she wasn't cleared to understand. Current enemy dispositions, recent changes to security patterns, weather forecasting that would affect her shooting conditions during the mission window. "Ahmed, after I complete the mission, what are the extraction coordinates?" He provided GPS coordinates that she memorized immediately, then watched him burn the paper rather than leave any physical evidence of their meeting. The extraction site was approximately 12 kilometers from her firing position, requiring overland movement through terrain that would challenge her endurance and navigation skills. "Helicopter pickup will occur at predetermined times, weather permitting," Ahmed continued. "If primary extraction fails, secondary coordinates have been established with backup timing. But Ms. Matthews, you must understand, extraction attempts are limited by fuel and security considerations. Missing your extraction window means overland escape through very hostile territory." The warning was clear. Success required precise timing and flawless execution. There would be no rescue missions, no second chances, no opportunity to call for help if everything went wrong. She'd complete the mission and reach extraction coordinates under her own power, or she'd be left to survive on her own in hostile territory. I understand. Ahmed nodded, studying her face as if memorizing details he might need to remember later. Ms. Matthews, many people are depending on your success, but remember, no mission is worth compromising your ability to escape and report. Sometimes the greatest victory is surviving to fight another day. Then he was gone, disappearing into the mountain landscape with the skill of someone who'd spent his life learning to become invisible in hostile territory. Ghost was alone, carrying specialized equipment through terrain that had been challenging travelers since humanity first learned to cross mountain passes, moving toward a firing position where she'd attempt to eliminate terrorists who were planning attacks against innocent Americans. The next 4 hours of solo movement through hostile territory would test every skill she'd developed during years of specialized training. But first, she needed to complete her final transition from Linda Matthews, freelance photographer, to Ghost Reeves, precision sniper operating in the most dangerous mission of her career. Alone in the mountain wilderness, she felt the familiar calm settling over her that came before impossible shots across impossible distances.